Contented Media presents Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, an original podcast series with Mark Hunter and Arthur Van Pelt.
Hello and welcome to Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, and the second of our weekly roundups of all the comings and goings in the COPA versus IT security guy trial. Joining me as always to offer his thoughts on what's been going down in the mean old streets of London town this week is Arthur Van Pelt. Arthur, for the sake of the uninitiated, why is everyone suddenly referring to Craig Wright as the IT security guy?
Yeah, that's a funny one. I'm in that camp also. It started at a few days ago. I don't even remember. There was at some point Mr. Hoff. Well, he at some point he either it slipped out of him or it was intentional. I have no idea. But he said that Craig Wright was basically in his career, especially in the era when Bitcoin was being prepared to be launched, when the white paper was made, when the code was written. So roughly around 2007, 2008 for the real Satoshi. But in that same era, Craig Wright was just an IT security guy, and that somehow that sticked. That was going around. Well, we are a lot on Twitter, so that's what we read mostly. A little bit on Reddit, but somehow that suddenly sticked, and everybody is using it. I even see media articles mentioning it in the headline, and it's funny. But there is a lot of truth behind it. Actually, we will probably dive into that maybe a bit more during this episode, but otherwise, indeed, his history, especially between 2000 and 2000, let's say 12 around, until the moment when he started with Hotwire and started to do things with Bitcoin. He was not so much interested in payment systems, but he was an IT security guy for all the companies that hired him, and he also worked at BDO, of course, around 2004 to 2008, and that was his job also at BDO.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we will come on to that pretty early on, to be honest. So, for those who have forgotten or are not sure, because these days are sort of blending into one into the next at the moment, for the first 3 days of the week, so Monday through Wednesday was Craig Wright's, was the end of his first phase of his testimony. He will be coming back as a witness again, I think next week or possibly the week after. They handed up a revised schedule today that I didn't take note of. He'll be coming back to answer questions on the evidence that was handed in late January to once Mr. Madden's reporters dropped on that. And then to yesterday and today, so Thursday and Friday, we had the first of our witnesses for Craig Wright. So we'll tackle those later on in the episode. So we won't, as with last week, there just isn't the time to go into all the details of everything that we saw and experienced. But I think it's important to do what we did and pick out some sort of general themes, because now his testimony is by and large complete. We can have a really good, think back to what we saw and what the general sort of themes were. And yeah, you mentioned it briefly there, Arthur. The thing that stuck out to me, and I'm sure it's something that has happened in testimony for prior cases, I think mainly with the Kleiman case because he was questioned a lot more. The way he's going about this, the way he's going about crowbarring Bitcoin into his history is by taking his prior work, his last 20, 30 years worth of work, and either crowbarring in references to Bitcoin or blockchain or that sort of thing, or he is taking work that he genuinely did and twisting it to make it seem like it was focused on a payment system or a transaction system or something that can be tangentially linked to Bitcoin and blockchain. I think is that something that you've seen him do in previous cases, or has that been really? It seems to me that's been a lot stronger with that in this trial.
Yeah, because of course the COPA is of course diving into his history way more detailed than ever before, And for me, it was already clear when I started my campaign of mapping out Craig's fraud and his rewriting of history. For me, it was pretty clear already. Basically in 2015, but I of course started to dive into it a bit more into 2019. But indeed, he rewrites history. He takes it works really well. Actually, he takes a little piece of the real Bitcoin history. He takes a little piece of his own real history. Then he makes a mix. He adds a forgery on top, and the lie with forgery exists. And if you don't know better, and if you're a gullible person looking at it for the first time, it looks very genuine. And I can give dozens and dozens of examples of that behavior, but all of them are coming out now in the COPA case because, of course, they are focused on mapping that out and debunking it.
And it's a very handy thing to do because if you can basically form a bridge between the work you were doing in the IT security field and the concept of Bitcoin, if you can find a bridge between those two, however flimsy it is, you've at least got a chance of trying to convince someone. So that's that's how he's gone about it. And I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned this only on social media or I mentioned it in the last episode, but he is very good at, as you say, blending the truth with a lie. So he can describe an event that took place, so a genuine event that took place, so 75% of it can be truth, and if he blends in 25% of fiction with that, it sounds genuine because most of it is. But as you say, someone that is not a subject matter expert, they won't know that they're being lied to. And an example that, again, I don't recall him using this much previously, but he has been really hammering home the point of Bitcoin's not a currency. It was never intended to be a currency. It's a timestamp server. It's in the white paper. It's a timestamp server. And I don't recall him ever using that before. And is that just because it's really prominent in the white paper and he can find a bridge from that to his prior work? Is that why this has come out now?
Yeah, I doubt that a little bit. This is he would make the job for himself much more easier, much more smoother for people listening to believe it when he stick more to what is actually written in the white paper, what is actually said by Satoshi Nakamoto over the years that he was active. That was 2008 until 2011. We know about the last emails in April of 2011. He left the Bitcoin Forum in December 2010. Until then, he wrote by head around 700 to 800, public forum posts. So if he would be able to stick more to that narrative of Satoshi, he would be way more convincing. But actually, he isn't, because, of course, there is a timestamp server thing. But Craig, in some way, he takes that narrative and makes it his own, but makes it his main narrative. Well, it was never the main narrative of Satoshi. I mean, for Satoshi, it is indeed a payment system, a means of exchange. Already the title of the white paper should point him into the right direction because the word
should be obvious.
It's a peer-to-peer cash electronic cash system is how the white paper is called. So how can you come up with that it is a timestamp server? Yeah, it's an element, but it's not the whole story.
Well, this was another thing that I really thought about today, was the fact that he is really pushing this idea that Bitcoin was one element of his whole MetaNet creation, and it was never supposed to be a currency. It was all about timestamp servers and things. So he's changing the face of what Bitcoin is. Sorry, he's changing what Bitcoin is on its face when he says that it's a timestamp server, not a currency. And then he's also saying, oh, it was only one tiny aspect of this much bigger thing. But that's so impossible to prove, if you like, because the only way that you get someone to believe that is by believing everything else that he says, because there's no evidence that Satoshi Nakamoto ever considered anything more than Bitcoin everybody thinks, and from what they've said and what he said and what they've read, that was the be all and end all. He came in, he created Bitcoin, and he left. There's no mention of that being a tiny part of anything else, is there?
Yeah, correct. That is the right assessment on this whole story. That is where you can see that Craig Wright is diverting, I think is the word, from the real story. He came up. You can see how he is moving forward by all the time. It started in 2013. We've discussed this several times before, but it started that he with picking random will addresses from the rich list and claiming that they were his. Then in 2014, he started with a Satoshi cosplay. He added some mining, some early mining stuff to it, and it went on from. The story became bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it is like almost. It is a megalomaniacal story of. I have no idea that it started for him in 1998 or around 2000, the year 2000, when he came up with an Australian government project called BlackNet, and in BlackNet should move forward with something called Timecoin and then Bitcoin, and now Bitcoin is only a small part of a massive project that has to do with data for enterprises and whatever, that the whole internet should change into a Bitcoin thing. Or the other way around, Bitcoin should become the internet. I have no idea what he wants. It's delusions of grandeur, I would call it.
Yeah, it just keeps growing and growing and growing with every time he's asked to talk about it. And again, without any evidence other than what he is linked with his bridges to his prior work. So digging into what evidence he actually gave on the stand then, there's a few themes that I wanted to pick up on, because we've experienced these previously, and it's quite interesting to note the same themes coming up again, seeing different examples of them. So the first thing is his memory, and I love how selective his memory is. There are so many things in his witness statements. He's 13 witness statements, whatever it is, that he's got specific memories of. He remembers the dates and the names, what was said, what was handed over. Everything is so specific in his witness statements. And yet, when it comes to him being cross-examined, suddenly everything is so vague. Just literally just takes one question from the prosecutor and he just almost crumbles. Suddenly it's like, oh yeah, well, I might have got that wrong. Like, there's so many examples that I noted down. There was the time when he said he sent, we know that Satoshi sent Bitcoin to a few people, but Craig Wright said he sent Bitcoin to hundreds of people, but he could not remember any of the names. Professor Wrightson, who he said he worked with between 2005 and 2009 on this, who was really influential, couldn't remember who Craig Wright was and had said he'd never worked with him. We already knew that Professor Rees's daughters said he had no interaction with Craig Wright and was not working with him on Bitcoin into his 90s. And then Craig Wright spun off into some idea about notes from years gone by. There are many times when he freely admitted, he said, oh yeah, I get people, I forget people, I get things wrong. And these are people and situations where in his witness statements he was very clear on, as I said, but he suddenly forgets them, or they're much more vague when it comes to questioning. And that is not a great look, is it? If you're a witness and you've written something down and you've referred to it, you've replayed that a few times in further witness statements. I mean, what do you think the judge is making of the fact that he's suddenly so vague and he's admitting that he gets dates wrong, admits that he gets faces wrong, admits that he gets names wrong? You can't take anything he says in his witness statements at face value, can you?
Yeah, exactly. And there are several more of those examples. He came up with a list of 22 people who were sent a copy of or a draft of the white paper in the second half of 2008. Now, in total, they try to find these people, and none of them were actually, they never received that white paper. He claimed once in the climate case that between 300 and 400 people knew about his name, Satoshi Nakamoto, and that he was doing Bitcoin in Australia. And now he admits finally that most of them will not cooperate in...
They won't give evidence for him.
Nay, because they say that they are receiving death threats, and they don't want to have anything to do with him and with Bitcoin, because it's all too dangerous. It's of course it's complete nonsense, and all those stories, a lot of bravura, a lot of but it ends up being nothing burgers.
Well, this was one thing, you mentioning Timecoin, that was interesting, because that is a great example of how he is, because there's, they can be very pointed and say, look, these people have never said they received the draft of the Bitcoin white paper. Oh no, they received the draft of Timecoin, or I had discussions over the concept of Timecoin. So the whole idea of a Bitcoin white paper is so malleable. He can just shift it around whenever he wants it, and he can say, yeah, this person has said this person has said that, and he changes from person to person and from time to time who got what and when, and there's no consistency there. And again, but that's not evidence. He was asked. He said, the prosecutor said, these people have not produced any evidence, to back this up. What evidence do you have? You gave it to these people. Oh, we've had discussions about it. Discussions, you claiming you've had discussions is not evidence. And I know he's just saying it because he has to say something. But if the best evidence you've got of handing over these things to dozens and dozens of people is just a bit of hearsay about, I told this person about this concept, it just doesn't wash, does it?
No, not in a courtroom, and it's good that it doesn't work like that, because in a courtroom you need to have very solid evidence, untampered, honest evidence that can be relied on, and Craig Wright, he doesn't manage to deliver that.
And there's something else I noticed as well while I'm on the subject. He is very keen on picking holes in what he's being asked, and in terms of specific terminology. There was the Dustin Treml incident, when we know that Dustin Treml came forward after the Hodlonaut trial and said, no, I did not receive any code from Craig Wright. I downloaded it from the bitcoin.org when it came out. And this was brought to Craig Wright's attention, wasn't it, the other day? And he said, because the Mr. Hoff said, look, Dustin Treml says you did not send him any code. He downloaded it from the website. And Craig Wright says, but I didn't share code with him. I sent him a link, and from the link he downloaded the code. So that's why he said that I didn't send any code to him. I sent him the link to the code. And he said, no, you didn't. He got it from bitcoin.org. He's like, no, he's lying. He accuses people of lying just because he can't get his own way. But that's just an example, isn't it, of how he changes the question. He turns the question around to suit an answer he can give when that question wasn't even asked.
Yeah, but that's how he rolls, Mark.
Yeah, no, it's true. So, actually, there was one more incident, and the whole, we've said this before, but the involvement of Gareth Williams in the Craig Wright story is just so crazy and so lacking in any evidence. And the bit that I've always found hilarious is the story that in January 2011, Craig Wright, Gareth Williams, and Dave Kleiman all joined together in some super secret squirrel video call while Dave Kleiman's in hospital about something about Gareth Williams wanting some information from Craig Wright about how to use this software that Craig Wright had developed to track Russian money laundering. And also just happened to pop in there about helping Craig Wright destroy his Satoshi history, emails and whatnot. And you and I both know, we found out from very early on, well, this is like sort of 7 months after Gareth Williams died. And this was brought up to Craig Wright very recently, either yesterday or would have been Wednesday, I think. And he straight away said, "I got the dates wrong." But he didn't get the dates wrong because he specifically said, we spoke in January 2011, because that was when, it was just weeks after Satoshi had left Bitcoin. And when Craig says he was looking to burn to this kind of scorched earth policy. So him saying he got the dates wrong, that's a complete lie. He specifically chose that date, didn't he? He just got it wrong because he forgot when Gareth Williams died.
Yeah, that maybe not 7 months. I think it was August by head that.
So
Gareth
4 months
died, but yeah, he was dead. But we made a joke already back then when Gareth Williams' name popped up in the Kleiman case, that they were doing seances with. Specific material to call the dead and communicate with them, but those are the things, and in that sense it's good that COPA is doing this now for the whole Bitcoin community and basically the whole world, because you don't want such a scammer walking around in the Bitcoin arena with these lame stories, and not because it's only lame stories. There's also a very big financial angle to it. Of course, he's trying to obtain billions and billions in damages and Bitcoin tokens that he's trying to freeze and confiscate from the networks, and especially, of course, the real Bitcoin BTC. And one should not think about it. It is really going to happen. It won't happen. I mean, it is for 99.999, let's say 100% sure. On the other hand, he's trying, and as long as he has a financial backer in Kelvin Ayre, he keeps on going, and it's just annoying.
Before we move on to the next theme, talking about how he's bad with people but good with code and this sort of thing. I'm going to hand over what I think were probably your two favourite instances from his testimony regarding the Patch Tuesday and this integer, which is a little bit beyond me. So do you want to cover what I think is Mr. Gunning maybe got both of them, or Mr. Hoff got one of them, but this integer coding situation and the Patch Tuesday, what do you want to talk us through those two? Because I know they're your little hobby horses.
Yeah, the Patch Tuesday was I was really surprised. I was like, whoa! It's an old debunk that I did in 2019. It looks like COPA picked that up from my writings. I wrote about it several times.
What was Craig Wright's excuse when that was put to him? Didn't he said he was a member of the top echelon of Microsoft developers, so he got it a few days early or some nonsense like that? Is that remotely feasible?
No, there is indeed. That was his excuse, that he was an MSDN. And that is also in my jargon. I know what it means. Then you are indeed a somewhat more special type of. But what I remember, I'm already out of that almost 10 years. So, no, not 10 years, 7 years, but for quite a while. So I have to look that up. But I just patiently wait for what the experts are going to say about it, the forensic experts. Because what I remember is that you do have special rights, special privileges if you are an MSDN dealer, but I think it's only for companies who have personnel that have several certificates of Microsoft, and not just one, but actually quite a few. And then you can be labeled as an MSDN, sort of dealer or reseller of Microsoft, and that gives you special rights. Then you can do more installations. You can do you can use enterprise software. Well, you're not an enterprise yourself, but it's more for internal use, for testing use, and things like that. And that might include also that you are getting updates earlier than the market out there. However, Craig Wright, if we are talking about 2009, he was not working for BDO anymore. He was not on the payroll there anymore, and that he was a lone wolf, so to say. And as far as I know, he never got any Microsoft certificates. He did not do any Microsoft course. He did not have Microsoft credentials whatsoever to be able to fall under that MSDN label. That's what I think. But again, those forensic experts have been diving into Craig's life way more than I ever did. And they probably know more than I do. So I'm waiting for that, and I'm very curious if they can debunk that. But I expect they will.
Is it unfair to say that if he was that much of a high flyer in the Microsoft development world, that he should have anticipated the updates crashing the Bitcoin system? Or is that being, let's pretend for a second this happened, is that being unkind?
Nee, that is certainly not unkind. If you know how good companies, how company with a strict IT policy do these things, they wait with updates. They park those updates in a separate network, in a test network or on a test server with several PCs connected to it. And then they test these updates. And if they see that the update is working and is solving problems for them, or is at least not crashing the network, then they will roll out to the rest of the network for the rest of the users. And then mostly, of course, during nighttime when people are not working. That is when you have a sound policy of IT updates. So if I hear that Craig is just blindly accepting, let's say earlier than the rest of the market, and he is just dumping those updates on his network, and then he finds out that his network is crashing, then our IT security guy, he doesn't even have a network update policy that he is using for himself. So I have my doubts, so to say. Now, and when you hear lawyers with Craig Wright discussing the Patch Tuesday, I was like, wow, they picked it up after 4 or 5 years after I have been debunking that thing. It's so cool. Yeah, I found that pretty cool. Now, the other one is just almost just as hilarious. It's not so much as a debunk as well as that. We always, many in the Bitcoin community, we all say that Craig Wright, he cannot code because there are no examples that he showed code like Satoshi shared with the whole world on the forums. He shared code in many emails with Gavin Andreessen, Mike Hearn, and others. So Hal Finney, etc. So we all know that he was a good coder. Gavin Andreessen called him a top 10% coder. So that says something. On the 14th, 2 days ago, Valentine's Day, after all. Oh, irony. Mr. Hoff was replaced by the King's Council of the Bitcoin developers, who had his little moments of fame, because during all those days we saw only Hoff, and now we saw for the first time in a more serious setting Mr. Gunning, the King's Council of the Bitcoin developers. Now, to cut a long story short, they came. He discussed the source code, the early source code of Satoshi with Craig Wright, and my jaw dropped on the floor. They came to a point where the unsigned integer was being discussed. Yeah. And he asked Craig, what does unsigned mean in this unsigned integer part of the code? And I will never forget, Craig Wright, he wanted to start with full of bravura, trying to say something, but he got stuck. He waved his hands in the air. They came to a grinding halt, those hands, and he had to admit, I don't know, I'm not so good at this. And there were several silences of several seconds. It was really painful. And of course, Mr. Gunning, when you try, and then he said something else which I don't remember. And the moment passed, but for the people who were watching, and there were several, and there were also several publishing about it, and they all noticed, whoa, what happened here? This is, and I quickly figured out that I asked around for a bit with people who are even more experienced with coding than I am, because I'm not a super coder, far from it. But so I asked how many times is this actually, because it's a rather common integer, an unsigned integer is a rather common thing in Bitcoin. So I ask, isn't it that this thing is more than 500 times in the early code? And I got confirmation from somebody who checked it, and he said, yes, it's actually more than 500 times that the unsigned integer is mentioned in the early code. So if you have been coding Bitcoin and you don't know what you have been doing 500 times, that is so weird. So this is for me another example that if you do not know what an unsigned integer, and even I understand what it is, because it's just a value that starts either with 0 or 1, 2, 3, and it is an how do you call that?
Like not negative.
It's a not negative, and I think there is an end value to it somewhere, but it starts with a 0. It are not negative values indeed.
So moving on then, another theme that definitely continued from last week is his accusations of people doing things, being things. It didn't stop, and if anything, it got a bit more incendiary and creative, shall we say. He accused Greg Maxwell of being Painted Frog, the guy that busted the plagiarized LLM, which we'll, if we've got time to, we'll come to in a second. He accused Marty Maly of being Cobra Bitcoin. And I believe there's a reason why he came up with that. What's the story there?
Yeah, because he still thinks that at some point Marty Maly, you know the story of Marty Maly probably, quite early in 2009, already in the first half, let's say second quarter roughly, by head, Marty Maly already joined Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009 and helped him with the coding, with being the administrator of Bitcoin.org, etc. But at some point, Marty Maly handed over the admin role and that stuff to someone else. And as far as I know, there was nobody in between, but it ended up that Cobra Bitcoin, who is indeed a different person as Marty Maly, ended up being the admin of Bitcoin.org. And either Craig Wright doesn't know or doesn't care or just lies around, and the latter is at least the case, because he indeed thinks that Cobra Bitcoin is still Marty Maly, but Marty Maly has nothing to do with Bitcoin anymore, and certainly not with Bitcoin.org.
Mm-hmm. So he also claimed that Jack Dorsey personally shut down his Twitter account, and he also claims that other COPA members have banned him from LinkedIn just because they don't like him and what he stands for. He claimed that Rory Kethlen-Jones, who the BBC reporter, who I know from personal experience is so anti-crypto. He's not anti-Bitcoin as such, but he just doesn't believe in the space. He doesn't really believe in Bitcoin, doesn't really understand it, and doesn't really care for it. And yet Craig Wright claimed he was pro-Bitcoin because of some sort of bias, some preconceived bias. And he was also claiming that Adam Back, because there was the whole, he got caught out with the emails between Adam Back and Wei Dai. He tried to make some excuse about that one, and he claimed that Adam Back didn't release all the emails between himself and Satoshi, all the DMs. He claimed that Marty Maly didn't release all the emails regarding who came up with the term cryptocurrency, which of course is important. He also complained that Gavin Andresen didn't release all the communications between them. it's just, it gets to the point.
And also why
many people.
die? Because why die only exchanged 2 or 3 emails with Satoshi, and they have all been released. And I have personal confirmation from why die. Lucky me, that indeed that was all the communication that they did. And Craig Wright says that the first communication actually was in August 2008. But Craig Wright has been lying that they already communicated with each other earlier, March or May 2008. But Waidai firmly denies that. The only communication were a few emails in August back and forth. And one email in, I think, January or February 2009 when... Bitcoin was just live, and Satoshi notified Waidai about that.
And there was also with the Adam Back thing, he was saying that he put in a blog post, or he wrote somewhere that Adam Back was dismissive of Bitcoin. He said it wouldn't work. They've all failed. Yours won't work. And he said it wouldn't work out. And they found the email. It's public, I think, or Adam Back released it. And there's no. Like he says, oh, sorry, I've not got around to reading your white paper yet. And that's not him being dismissive and saying it won't work. That's him saying he hasn't read it yet. And Craig Wright was like, oh, no, he's dismissing it. He's not bothered to read it, even though I gave it to him, this sort of thing. But Stephan Matthews didn't read the white paper for weeks or maybe even months, apparently. And yet he doesn't say that Stephan Matthews was dismissive of it. So yet again, it's this whole, once you add up all the characters who are involved in this conspiracy, even people that have done the exact same thing, if they're on his side, they're not mentioned. If he perceives they are against him in some way, he will push his experience with him as far negative as he possibly can to try and prove the point. And when it comes up in evidence, he still tries to claim that these people that made fairly standard comments at the time had these ulterior motives. And, I mean, again, like I said, this carries on from last week. And 1 or 2 people being potentially against him in some way, fair enough, for whatever reason. But the judge has now got a list of people as long as his arm who are conspiring against Craig Wright in all means and all manners. And any judge, I think, would have a hard time believing that. But this judge, Justice Mellor especially, seems really switched on. And I just don't think he's going to side with Craig Wright on that, is he?
Nay, and not only what you just mentioned. I mean, all the hacks, people have been hacking him. His counsels didn't perform as instructed. Third-party laptops that have been tampered. His email accounts and private blogs were run by others and made mistakes. Citrix environments don't do what they are supposed to do with copy-paste actions and all kinds of technical issues everywhere. And it goes on, and everybody is to blame except Mr. Wright himself. And just like you said, 1 or 2, maybe 3 of those excuses are working in a big story. But if the big story is only excuses, then you have no excuse at all. Then you are your own excuse.
And I think it's like we mentioned last week. If you're going to believe that Craig Wright did this, you have to believe every single one of these things happened. Every single excuse he's given for the last, every single day he was on the stand, every excuse he gave as to why a document was backdated, every excuse he gave as to why a blog post was backdated, every single code that was wrong, every single this, every single that, the hundreds and hundreds of things that have been put to him and the excuses he's given, they all have to line up and have to be believable. And you just cannot look at that big picture compared to the one glaring opposing picture, which is he's not Satoshi and it didn't happen. When you really weigh it up, it's just amazing to think that people still believe it. And I think that's how he sort of succeeded, because no one does look at this in totality. It's only when you get to these situations, only when you get to a judge who's looking at this fresh for the first time, does someone actually look at this in totality and say, this is just this great big ever morphing ball of coincidence and conspiracy that I've got to believe is true. So like you say, it's actually good that these things happen, because it's very rare that anyone gets the chance to look at this afresh.
Yeah.
So the last thing we'll touch on before we move to the witnesses is the discussions that were taken over the signing sessions and the involvement of Stephan Matthews and Calvin Ayre. And there's a few points here that I wanted to bring up. What I think is going to be interesting when Stephan Matthews gives his testimony next week is he is going to now have to tread the line between what he said in the Hoddernaut trial, what he's put in his witness statements, and what Craig Wright has now changed Stephan Matthews' story to with his own testimony. So, for example, there is a bit of a confusion about the white paper situation, because, I mean, I know in the past Stephan Matthews has been unsure. He's changed his mind in interviews and in testimony as to whose name was on the copy of the Bitcoin white paper that he got. That's then changed to be, it wasn't the Bitcoin white paper, it was the Timecoin white paper, which may have morphed to the Bitcoin white paper. And it's also changed from a hard copy to a USB. So it's all over the place, which is going to be great fun to watch. And there was an interesting moment when Mr. Hoff said to Craig Wright, well, you've said you gave him a hard copy, and Stephan Matthews says he received the USB. And Craig Wright says, well, no, I gave him, I was always putting things in his desk, always giving him multiple copies of the white paper. And Mr. Hoff says, well, you didn't say that in your witness statement. And Craig Wright says, I didn't think I had to. That is such a stupid answer, because, like, of course you had to. If the question is, what did you give him? You don't just say the one copy that you say you gave him. You have to list all the times you did. And it just paints him again in this really bad light that he just couldn't be bothered to do the thing properly. Yeah. And it's actually quite a crucial piece of evidence. So, I take it you're going to be looking forward to Stephan Matthews' testimony next week anyway, but I think he's going to be in a bit of a sticky position now, isn't he?
I think so. And I am also very curious what he is going to say, because he has been witnessing, talking about the signing sessions, he has been witnessing the signing session between Gavin Andresen and Craig Wright, and there is a big discrepancy in that in both of those stories. Craig Wright says that Gavin Andresen set up the laptop that was newly bought on request of Gavin Andresen, and Gavin Andresen says the complete opposite. He says that Craig Wright set up that newly bought laptop and installed everything, including Electrum and operating system and etc. So what is which side is Stephan Matthews going to choose? Yeah, most likely Craig's side.
Have a guess.
Or he's going to make it more neutral and say, yeah, I didn't watch all the time and I saw both of them doing things. That all in all, I have sometimes wondered, talking about Stephan Matthews, there might be a part that is somewhat truthful. For example, if Craig Wright has been coming into his office and knowing that Craig Wright and Dave Kleiman wrote a paper in the second half of 2008 about wiping hard disk, the wiping controversy, something. If that is a white paper that he shared with Stephan Matthews, then there is some truth in that there has been a white paper on his desk or on a USB stick or whatever. Only it wasn't Timecoin, it wasn't Bitcoin, it was something about wiping hard disks. And Craig Wright has been changing that story later to that was the Bitcoin or Timecoin or whatever he is now making of it white paper. And if you believe, if he tells you that straight in your face, as if it is completely true, you have been wrong with your memory, and my memory is better than yours. It was Bitcoin. And then you think, yeah, okay, well, yeah, then it was Bitcoin probably, yeah, whatever. And then you start telling that story to the outside world. Also, yeah, I've seen the Bitcoin white paper. And then you can start to convince yourself that it is actually true, but it's actually, the con man, Craig Wright, who convinced you that that something else is now changed to Bitcoin. That might be the background. Of course, I'm not sure. Stephan Matthews will declare me crazy, and he knows better. On the other hand, it is so absolutely 100% sure that all this never happened. There's another story that Stephan Matthews has been telling a few times about 50,000 Bitcoin that was offered to him for $500. That was supposed to have happened early 2009 when Bitcoin still did not have any price. No, it started to have a price in October 2009, so it has happened before that. So roughly the first half year, so to say, 50,000 for $500, while Bitcoin did not have any price, and Stephan Matthews was not interested. Well, he should have been and kept it, and he was rich now. But those things did not happen. They just didn't happen. Seriously. So those are lies. That is so 100% sure for me that Stephan Matthews is willingly lying on behalf of Craig Wright.
And I didn't quite catch this at the time. I think I maybe was deep in the trial stuff. But what's this talk of $100 million incentive he's got? What's the story there?
Yeah, that was something that I think came from Calvin Ayre, because Calvin Ayre, of course, is very eager to see Craig Wright winning this lawsuit, because then the patents will have an patents will have we'll have some it's another anecdote. But then the patents will have some value. Well, actually, way more value, because they have the touch of Satoshi. That will be worth something. I can imagine that he thinks that. Technically speaking, the patents are, of course, still not so good, so to say, but. Anyway, if they have the touch of Satoshi, then probably people want to pay double or triple what they initially thought to pay for it. He once, I think it was to Christian Ager Hansen, he tried to get him on his side to put some influence on at least Lynn Wright, if I remember well. And he offered him, if you can arrange for me that Craig Wright is winning the lawsuit, then I will give you $100 million. And I think it's that story started there. If Stephan Matthews has been offered the same, I'm not sure. Did you see that somewhere? So did you see that somewhere being mentioned? Or?
Yeah, it's so vague in my memory. I think I glanced over it and forgot to check back. So I thought I'd ask and see if you knew something about that, but I may have been mistaken. So we'll see if it comes up. It will obviously certainly come up if it's true. Yeah,
I'm quite sure that it was Christian Ager Hansen who came up with that story, that he was offered $100 million, and that was also one of those red flags that made him aware that something shady was going on, so to say.
I see. Okay. Talking of Stephan Matthews still, what was interesting that I didn't know before was this claim from Craig Wright that his email account, his encrypt email account, was apparently, here we go, taken over, removed from his control after the signing sessions debacle, and someone else was using his and Ramona's email addresses to send messages to the likes of Stephan Matthews and Calvin Ayre, pretending to be Craig Wright and arranging the coin send and arranging these things. This was just, I know he's talked about a lot of hacking and people taking over my emails and things, but this was just too coincidental and too out there for me to even begin to believe it, because it was all to do with what they would do after the Sartre blog post was a failure, and he just had to find a way to dismiss any claim he was trying to continue to prove he was Satoshi, because he'd painted Rob McGregor as this evil figure. And so he was claiming that all these emails between Stephan Matthews, Calvin Ayre and himself were all faked by somebody else to try and push him along this line to send these coins. And I don't recall him ever mentioning that again. Ever mentioning that before. And he was even, as Mr. Hoff pointed out, Stephan Matthews was even with Craig Wright when he was receiving these emails, or around the same time he was receiving these emails. And he said, well, how did Stephan Matthews react when you were sending him these weird emails? So he says, I thought Stephan Matthews was behaving weird. I'm like, are you really telling me that that Stephan Matthews thinks you're emailing him about weird things and is not even mentioning it in your face-to-face meetings? I just... The idea that someone had taken over his account at this critical time, and Ramona's account, and was pretending to send emails between the three of them or the whole bunch of them, and no one ever found out, no one suspected. Utter bollocks.
Yeah, no, but exactly the same story, or maybe it's a mix of the two things. Happened, and that was also something that was quite astonishing, not really a big surprise, but still somewhat astonishing to me. There were also, he had an email address on a company called Tish Consulting.
Yeah.
And two puzzle pieces I could connect there. Because I have always been suspicious about the era before the docs of Wired and Gizmodo. So then we're talking about the era September 2015 up till November 2015. That is the period when this docs package, I always call it self-docs because I'm quite sure that Craig Wright did it himself, but he always said nobody was talking about the signing sessions that were later in April and May with the Sartre post into 2016. And I always thought, no, this has been prepared way before, because already it was mentioned in a June 2015 contract that the life story rights were sold, that a ghostwriter would be looked for, which later turned out to be Andrew O'Hagan, who wrote the Satoshi Affair. And they started working on those things way before December 2015. And now it came out that indeed, in September, October, November, several emails were shown to Craig Wright, but on an email domain called tish.co.uk or something. And he completely denied that he ever saw those emails. He did not write them. He did not receive from people. Also, his wife was on those emails. His wife has been emailing within those threads. He has been himself emailing, but no, that must have been someone else. And he is quite sure that it must have been Robert McGregor, because he was pushing the whole signing sessions thing, that he should come out as Satoshi, etc. But he was reluctant and he didn't want it, and he felt being strongly pushed by Robert McGregor in that era. Now, that is a story that is so completely bollocks, because if you read it, it are Craig Wright emails. The emails make sense in the time frame, and for me at least, the only question that remains is, were that whole because Calvin was on the in the same email threads, Ramona, his wife, Rob McGregor, Stephan Matthews, all those people who were involved in the bailout and later the organization of those signing sessions, they were all in those email threads. So for me, the only question is, were they all aware of the what they call the proof packet back then, that it was going out already early in October and November? It was already sent to several media, or was Craig Wright doing that alone because he was afraid of the signing sessions, because he knew he could not sign anyway? So if he could make an workaround that he was already known as Satoshi by the whole world because of that the docs package that ended up being discussed by Wired and Gizmodo, if that was the moment for the world, that the world knew that Craig Wright was Satoshi, and it was not being debunked as it was, as we know now that it was. Yeah, then he didn't have to sign anymore, of course. But yeah, history went different, and Wired and Gizmodo completely failed within a few days, and it was all retracted and put disclaimers on the articles.
Yeah. Well, that whole Tish thing, I missed that. I forget what I was doing, but I missed that entire morning or afternoon session. So I need to go back to BitNorbert's thread and read up on that, because I think there's interesting stuff there. Talking of Calvin Ayre, the last thing I'll mention about specifics about Craig Wright's evidence is, again, when Craig Wright was presented with Calvin Ayre's email that he supposedly sent to Craig Wright, that massive long one that Christian Ager-Hansen leaked in September, again, he claimed to have never have seen it. And I'm not buying that one either. But,
no.
But it doesn't really give you any advantage. I mean, I know you can tell what he's trying to do. He's trying to distance himself from it, which is kind of the way he goes about things. But it didn't help him at all, especially because when Calvin starts to talk about he's going to make some money from BSV, it's so funny because Mr. Hoff said Calvin Ayre's going to make a lot of money from if you win, isn't he? He said, actually, no, he'll make money if I lose, or he's going to lose a lot of money if I win. And he says, well, okay, well, let's have a look at this tweet. BSV to $1,000. Once I start buying in January, see what happens then. And Craig says, oh, no, he's not talking about BSV tokens. He's talking about the companies and this sort of thing, right? Next tweet. Yeah. I'm talking about BSV tokens. It's just
Oh,
Christ. I was
a
brilliant ending. But he just denied everything, denied Calvin Ayre was funding him, denied there was anything there. He said he'd sold N-Chain shares to cover his legal fees. There's obviously a reason why he's distancing Calvin Ayre from himself, but it just makes him look so much worse. You kind of think, you know what? Just admit it. It looks worse if you don't, doesn't it?
Yeah, right, exactly. But it's just one of those things in a massive row of convoluted stories, discrepancies, and straightforward lies. Yeah, what can I say? Justice Meller has to make sense of it, and I'm pretty sure that he can't, and he will come to only one conclusion. This is just one big convoluted story of somebody who is living his own fairy tale in his head and is making a fool of himself and the people around him.
So overall then, Craig has had his chance now. This was his big opportunity. This was when Calvin Ayre was talking about, we can't wait to get the evidence in. Craig's going to get his chance on the stand to talk about Bitcoin. The world's eyes are going to be on him as he talks about BSV and this sort of thing. He's had his chance now. That was his shot. Out of 10, how would you rate Craig Wright's performance on the stand?
No, I have to give him one thing. He is. And I seriously mean that. When I read every now and then, because I'm not only interested in what the Bitcoiners say about him, I'm also every now and then I browse around a bit in the BSV community and see what they say, and they are quite happy with Craig's performance, because he is looking sort of relaxed. He is giving answers. He is denying everything, and he's giving somewhat plausible explanations. Because if you say just one excuse that he came up with, the Citrix server excuse. When things move on Citrix, what was it, MetaFrame or something, and documents are being copied and pasted, then it can happen that parts of one document end up in another document. Yeah, and that happens so nicely that suddenly a part of a Bitcoin white paper ends up in a Blacknet paper exactly on the spot where it is supposed to be, that it is looking like, oh yes, Blacknet is a predecessor of Bitcoin. And then it ends up on page 3 in the exact spot where it should be. Now, of course, Citrix is not doing that. But anyway, if you do not know those things, if you look at it from a distance, it's somewhat superficial, superficially, then it makes sense that if the accusation is there are parts of text from other documents ending up in this document, yes, because the Citrix server copy-paste technical stuff, blah, 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 and it ended up that it is being altered and mixed and etc. It sounds plausible at first glance. It sounds, and that's how he rolls.
One thing I noticed was Justice Mellor got shorter with him as the days went on. He started off, not really cutting him off and allowing him to kind of go on his little rants. But I noticed that as the days went past, he actually was cutting him off and being quite stern with him by the end, wasn't he? So I thought that was interesting that the judge gave him a little bit of leeway. And then he was just kind of reining him in a little bit and saying, no, we don't need that, thank you. That was quite interesting. I'm not sure if it has any bearing, but it's something I noticed. The last thing that I will say on this, the whole his performance and what we learned, it's interesting that there are still members of the Craig Wright camp who think that there's more to come. Now, I know he's coming back to refute the evidence from the late entry of the evidence that came in January. He's coming back next week to do that. But generally speaking, that's it. There's no more evidence coming in after this. Craig Wright is not going to sit down with the judge and talk about Bitcoin and get his Bitcoin point of view across. That's it. There's no stenography. There's no watermarks. What you saw is what you get. And I still think there are people who believe there's going to be more examination from Craig Wright's lawyers. Do you get that impression as well?
Yeah. I even tweeted, I think it was yesterday, I tweeted that I found a remark on Twitter of Calvin Ayre, who thinks that, now that everything has passed, now it's the turn of Craig Wright to convince the judge how Bitcoin is going to work. I was like, what? Maybe he's going to be, and I think it is one whole day. He's going to be on the stand one whole day, but that is only because he delivered another set of forgeries last minute, and I think they found a spot that he will not next week or the week after. I don't remember, but I think they will find that they found a spot where he can discuss. Not Bitcoin, not BSV, but the extra set of forgeries that he has been delivering, and he has to explain them on a separate day. But the days will only be filled with several witnesses. A few of him, I think, on Monday. Maybe Tuesday. Stephen Matthews, I think, will. He will be on Monday at the end of the day and a part of Tuesday, and then at some point the witnesses for COPA will come, and we already understood that several witnesses of COPA will not be cross-examined by Craig's side, and that gives extra room because I think they take roughly 2 hours for most witnesses. So if 3 of them are falling from the planning, that means that one whole day is falling free, and they will probably use that whole day for an extra day Craig Wright. And then we of course have still the sessions, and that's a part what I'm looking forward to. Of course, is 5 whole days of the forensic experts. Cross-examination.
Well, before we go on to what the witnesses had to say Thursday and Friday, let's talk briefly about the lack of cross-examination. So what that means, when a witness is not cross-examined, that means that their witness statement is being accepted as the truth by the other side. So when Craig Wright is spouting all this stuff about how Dustin Treml didn't do this and didn't do that, and he got the code from me, but he got a link, not the code, Dustin Treml's version is very different from that, and the Craig Wright's team are accepting his version as the truth. So that's a really important point to get across, is that whoever is not being cross-examined, the judge will look at that witness statement and accept that as the version of truth compared to Craig Wright's hearsay. So that's an interesting point to note, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned Dustin Treml, and that is one of those witnesses that will not be cross-examined.
Mm-hmm. So, talking of witnesses, then this won't take us quite as long to go through, I don't think. We'll start with who we saw today on Friday, because they were the least interesting of the bunch. First up on Friday morning was Craig Wright's younger sister, Danielle De Morgan, who I didn't even know he had a younger sister until I saw that she was testifying. She really didn't bring much to the party, did she? Now, again, it's worth saying that we have not seen their witness testimony, so we don't know what they've said. All we can find out is what they're questioned on. So they might only be questioned on about 10% of their story, but we get an idea from how they are questioned as to what they've said. So all we got from her was some vague question about a ninja, Craig dressing up in a ninja suit, and that convinced her, or because the name Satoshi Nakamoto sounded Japanese, that she knew that he was Satoshi, and that she saw computers in a room. It was all very, family testimony already is pretty weak, but that was fairly lame stuff, wasn't it, from her this morning?
Yeah, because as far as I understood, there was never mentioned Satoshi Nakamoto. There was never mentioned something with Bitcoin, and indeed it was only focusing on that when he was around 18 or 19 years old, that he was waving, I think it's called wielding, with a Japanese sword, and dressed in a ninja suit, that they did not recognize him. And the younger sister was 12, 13, 14 years old somewhere, 14 or 15, few years younger as Craig at least. And she was with several friends, same age, roughly 14, and they got scared and they run back home and scream to the parents, "Well, there's a crazy guy in the park or something." And it ended up that they found out that it was Craig Wright himself, dressed as a Japanese ninja type of person. Yeah, and I was like, if that means that. There are probably hundreds of thousands of people who are interested in, at least for maybe a few days or a few months or a few weeks in their life, being interested in the Japanese culture and do some role playing as a prince or a princess or a cowboy, or we all have our phases in our childhood. So does that prove that you are Satoshi? No, not at all. And then indeed that he had a lot of computers. Yeah, we know, because he was an IT security guy. He ran either under the label of BDO or companies before BDO and after BDO, same story. He had information defense. He ran servers where he checked the security and the firewalls and etc. Remotely of his customers. That's how he earned some money. Of course, he had computers. He when he did that's also something, and nobody makes that connection. But in 2003, 4, 5, I think it ended in 6. Between 2003 and 2006, there was the Ryan case. At first, he had to go 28 days to jail for contempt of court, but it was changed to community services. Now, but what were those community services? That he refurbished computers for the something church. That he gave to children and poor families. So of course he had a lot of computers and servers around the house and in his garage and in his second, what was it, in the shed in Banyu, because it was his work and it was his punishment from the Ryan case. So yeah, but does that prove that you are Satoshi? No, it gives you the opportunity to, in 2013 and especially 14, when he started to role play Satoshi, to overhaul that stuff into something Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto.
The next person we had was a chap called Mark Archbold, who was a compliance manager for Lassiter's, and they hired Craig Wright in the late 90s, I think it was, to upgrade their firewall system. And we didn't really learn a great deal from that. All we really learned was that in around 2004, 2005, they apparently had a conversation about digital currency, which seems to be neither here nor there. And Mr. Archbold himself said had no bearing on Craig Wright's Satoshi claim. He seemed like he couldn't give a damn either way whether Craig was Satoshi or not, to be honest. So that was a bit of nothing. And then in the afternoon, well, through lunchtime, I think it was up to lunchtime, it was, I think it's Karen Jones, who is a patent attorney who is employed by nChain. I missed most of this for various reasons, but from what I caught, I think the guy questioning her was trying to get the point across that Craig Wright's name goes on the patents, but he doesn't necessarily come up with the patents himself. Like, there's only 6 patents he has come up with himself, whereas the rest he chucks his name on. Now, while that might be true, I don't really think, and she was pretty non-committal on it. I don't really think it added anything to COPA's case. I don't really think it made much of a difference I don't think that if any punches were thrown, they didn't really land, I don't think, did they, with that one?
No, I think so, but of course those are the minor punches for a bit. First, a little anecdote that I immediately tweeted it out when I came across. That was that Archbold guy from Lassiter Casino. Indeed, late 1990s and early 2000. When he started working there, it was completely 100% clear that, again, IT security guy was doing IT security guy work at Lassiter with firewalls and stuff like that, and nothing else. And that it later indeed morphed into a conversation they had a bit later, indeed, 2004-5, somewhere, I think 2005. And then something about tokens, digital tokens, etc., was being discussed. That was what this guy was remembering, but he completely blocked that because it was either forbidden or there was something in the legislation of Australia, I think, that completely forbid them to do something like that. Now, and so I look back in the transcript of what Craig Wright said about Lassiter in Norway in 2022. In the Hodlnaut trial, and there he turned Lassiter as if he has been developing a token system for Lassiter, and it ended up not being implemented. Nay, it was discussed that it could not be implemented, so it never came from the ground, and but Craig made it look like as if he has been developing something for Lassiter in those early days. No, that completely did not happen. So for me, that was a bit of a debunk. And the funny thing is, I already expected that to happen before even this guy came on the screen, because I was like, for me, it was so perfectly clear that Craig Wright, he was not interested in financial system. He did not have the expertise. He did not have the certificates. He did not have the education. He did not have the interest,
security
or the
guy,
incentives, or whatever. He was just an IT security guy. So so he was a bit in the hardware. He was in the stuff like firewalls and things like that. So he is not developing like a big inventor. He is not inventing token systems. That is so very different of your normal role in what you're doing for those organizations. So that I found interesting of this Archbold person, and for this lady or Mrs. Jones, she made it, by the way, pretty clear. At some point, she got a little agitated. Even she made it really clear that she was not on the payroll of N-Chain. She is more of a contractor, self-employed person that is doing, little jobs, and mostly in the 2016-17 era. Lately, they have, I think, after 2018, they found their own counsel at N-Chain for the patent, for the legal. They had their own legal counsel, so she is less involved. That is something that she made really clear, that she's not on the payroll, so she sees these things on a distance. But what was quite clear, and for me, the point came across. If the judge is picking it up, I don't know, but I'm sure that in the final arguments during the last days, that they will probably emphasize this a little bit more. But for me, it became quite clear that if you make a point that out of the several hundred, or make it 1,000, and then you have patent families and you have foreign registrations, so it ends up that in total you might end up with 3,000 or 4,000 patents, but it are only a few hundred individual patents that we are talking about. Indeed, six of them have a Craig Wright name. Many others have Craig Wright and another name, and also many others don't even have Craig Wright's name on them. And it became known, for us it's not really a surprise, because to me and David Pearce, and of course especially David Pearce, because he's doing the nitty-gritty of that stuff and the research in that, we knew that by head, I think around 60 of those patents, initially, Craig Wright's name was not even on them. So only in many cases, even 3 years after filing the patent, they changed the patent to put Craig Wright's name additionally on them for, well, whatever reason. And that is pretty weird. Now, so if you, at some point they also came up with a timesheet. And that was quite an interesting little piece of paper or digital document, where they show that other inventors have contributed to patents, quite substantially more. And I remember percentages that between 75% and 90% of a patent was appointed to the other inventor, and Craig Wright only, let's say, 10% to 25%. Now, why is this important? If you have Bitcoin and you do, or blockchain in general, if you do an invention and you think that the master of Bitcoin and the emperor of blockchain is Craig Wright, he should be able to come up with the most fancy inventions that you can think of, and that is how it has been presented all the time. That he is so good at it, but it ends up that he is not so good at it. And why is this important in relationship to his Satoshi ship? N-Chain, when they have to appoint a patent for 75% to another person and only 25% to Mr. Blockchain himself or Mr. Bitcoin himself, it ends up that he is not so Mr. Bitcoin after all. So I hope that this point is coming across to Justice Meller. I hope so.
Mm-hmm. There was actually one thing I did note that could be potentially important, but it's something that I've noted as well to people that just don't seem to get it. The prosecutor said to her, does the fact that someone has got a lot of patents in this area mean that they created Bitcoin? And I'm paraphrasing. And she said, no, not at all. And I completely agree. Just because you've got, even if he did do these patents, it doesn't mean you invented it. It means you've learned it and understood it and taken it to different places. And I think that's something that people don't quite get. But like you said as well, that's the reason why he can say, "Oh, I did 3 patents. I wrote 3 patents at lunchtime." No, you didn't. You got your name put on 3 patents at lunchtime. You told them, "Put my name on these 3." That's how it happens.
No, exactly. I even understood somewhere. I think Ager Hansen leaked that because he did many leaks. Yeah, most of them, if not all of them, have now been deleted because at some point we understood that he was chased by the legal department of N-Chain, and that's probably by court order or something, that he should not leak stuff and make things public. So he deleted all those tweets. But I think I remember there was one tweet that he leaked that he opened up about that patent process in office of N-Chain. Then we are talking about, of course, September last year and earlier. Up till then, that Craig was just walking around in office and picking patents here and there from desk and said, I have been helping you with this patent. Yeah, but Craig, that was only 10 minutes and explaining me 2 lines of the 3,000 lines in this patent. So that was not so important. Yes, that was important. So I want my name on that on that patent also. And that's how he also got his name on patents. Well, he did almost no work for those things. He still managed with some pressure to get his name on them. Yeah.
So those were today's witnesses, and they were relatively interesting, but they weren't as interesting as the first batch we got on Thursday. And now, given time constraints, we'll try and keep this as light as we can, but they are worth going into. The first person that we saw was Dr. Ignatius Pang. And he is a data analyst who did a lot of work for Craig Wright on a particular lawsuit. And there was a lot of talk about a Lego situation as well, which was a bit baffling for me, to be honest. We won't go into that now because we're pushed for time. But it seemed to me that the best claim that he had was that there was something about Craig Wright was walking around the canteen saying, "Has anybody heard about Satoshi Nakamoto?" And the prosecutor said that, well, that's firstly a weird thing for someone to do who wants them to be kept private. And then Ignatius Pang, he couldn't agree quick enough with the prosecutor that it was a hazy recollection. He admitted really quickly that it was a hazy recollection. He pretty much undermined his testimony, didn't he, right at the end, I think?
Yeah, there were 2 important things that, and indeed we will not go deeply into it, but that Lego story that was connected to the word blockchain, that the word blockchain was mentioned. No, my first thought was maybe with Lego you make a block train, so maybe he misunderstood something.
Train, yeah.
But indeed that Satoshi Nakamoto, that was very quickly. Yeah, it looked like it. It was something Japanese. I don't remember
so
very well.
Vague.
And it was very, very hazy.
Yeah.
So they could just leave that guy at home, and he was sort of relieved almost that he was set free. Because it was hardly anything important. It was a nice guy. I mean,
he seemed like a nice guy.
A coffee. Yeah, it was a very friendly, humble guy. He was smiling several times. So I thought, you are a good, nice person and probably very honest. On the other hand, also those type of people can be put under a little bit of pressure that he will try to make his friends comfortable and tell onward what they would like to hear, while when he is really thinking back that he was like, was it indeed a Japanese name? Was it maybe something else? And then maybe Craig. It must be something like that at least. Because that's how Craig is working. He is very convincing telling you something that something happened like that, either with him being the main person, but if he involves the other person, the person that he is talking to in the story, the same type of conviction, to try to convince that other person, he can be, he has then the same level of trying to convince that other person. Now, and Pang looked, to me at least, a person that is only because he wants to be friendly to his the partner that he is talking with, that he will say, sure. But on the other hand, I cannot really blame him, because he's just a friendly guy, and when you're like that, then you can be bamboozled rather easily.
Mm-hmm. The next chap on screen was Robert Jenkins, who I noticed some people took, whereas they liked Dr. Ignatius Pang, they took an instant dislike to Robert Jenkins just from how he came across. And he was another former colleague of Craig Wright's from the sort of late 2000s, early 2010s. And he said that they were discussing concepts like Bitcoin and blockchain and digital cash and this sort of thing in those fairly early times. But I believe that what the issue that the COPA lawyers raised with him was that for the Hodlonaut trial, he said they discussed these concepts in 2011, and in his witness statement for the COPA trial, he said they happened in 2009, 2010. And when they drilled into that a little bit, they realized that he had actually been allowed to refer to emails and notes for the Hodlonaut trial, which is how he came up with 2011. But they asked him and all the other witnesses for Craig Wright not to go back and look at records, but to make a best estimation from their memory. And that's when he came up with 2009 and 2010. So they said, well, do you agree then that your recollection from the Hodlonaut trial is more accurate? And he had to say yes, because I was allowed to look up notes and things. So that was interesting, first of all. But there is a theory as to why Craig Wright's witnesses were told not to look up old emails, and that is because it might prejudice their case if they said they'd looked through emails and had found nothing. So it's better to say that, I've got all these emails but I couldn't look, than to say I looked through my emails and found nothing. How does that sit with you, that theory?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, of course. And that's why it was good that this anecdote came up in front of the judge, because then you can see that a certain type of witness tampering is taking place.
Well, on that subject, I'll leave you to describe what happened right at the end. When we thought that everything with Mr. Jenkins was done, what happened over the Timecoin situation?
Yeah, that was a sort of a little, let's call it a little bombshell, because apparently he had notes in front of him. At first he said that he took notes before the session started, and then he said no, only I think one or two words were written down before. One of them was "my lord," that he should address Justice Meller as "my lord," that he wanted to remind himself of. So that was put on a piece of paper, but also a few other words, and one of them was Timecoin and PayPal and eBay, or I think also two other words. But Timecoin was specifically the most interesting word, of course, in this anecdote, because at first it looked like that he said that all the notes were put on that paper before the session started. And then he said, no, only "my lord" was put on paper before the session started, and the rest of the words were put on paper during the sessions, that he should remind himself that he should not forget to mention it. And then, of course, the guy interviewing him, the King Counsel of, I think he was from must be from COPA. I don't remember his name, sorry, because it was not Hoff, and it was also not Mr. Gunning. It was a third lawyer that was doing that interview. But anyway, he immediately said, "You are lying, because we have been watching you, and you did not look at that paper very often, and we did not see you writing on the screen. No, yeah, he has been writing, and he was very certain that he had been writing. Now, and what was so interesting about that Timecoin, the word Timecoin, that he said that then the years 2009, 2010, and it flipped a little bit around, and then it was also probably 2011, what was talked about, that he saw a white paper, and they even put the Timecoin white paper in the screen to refresh his memory, and he said, yeah, that's it. That he had seen that not in 2007 or 8, because that was actually the era of that white paper. And of course, in 2009 or 2010 or 2011, that Timecoin white paper did not exist or was not very important anymore because it was Bitcoin. But anyway, he saw that between 2009 and 2011. Now, and for me, that is so perfectly clear that Mr. Jenkins is lying there. Why? The Timecoin white paper is a forgery that came up in 2019 and later, where Craig Wright thought, let's create some unique material that only I have as Satoshi Nakamoto and that nobody else has, not even the real Satoshi Nakamoto, but so that it makes his position as Satoshi Nakamoto very unique. And we saw that also with the LaTeX files coming up more recently that he created in between September or August and December last year. But that Timecoin white paper was dated, and I don't remember the month exactly, I think around 2019. He started creating that stuff for the Hodlnaut and McCormack cases, because then he needed Satoshi packages also, of course. So that is dated around 2019. Now, that means that the Timecoin white paper never existed in 2007 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 11, that whenever Jenkins says that he saw it, it could never have happened because that stuff did not exist. It are made-up forgeries from many years later.
And also, didn't he say, because he never mentioned it, I think he testified on Craig's behalf for a prior case. The Hodlnaut case. So he didn't mention Timecoin in the Hodlnaut testimony. He didn't mention Timecoin when he was cross-examined. Here, he only mentioned Timecoin right at the very end, when apparently it just sprang into his mind after all these years of conversation. It never came to him until this second. I don't buy that at all.
No, not at all. And like you said, he skipped like 3-4 occasions where he could and should have mentioned it. The witness statement in Hodlnaut, the testimonial in Hodlnaut, the cross-examination in Hodlnaut. Then in the COPA case, he also wrote a witness statement. Then you have the live session in front of the camera. And then only when indeed Craig's barrister is starting to ask a few questions, then suddenly he thinks, "Oh yeah, it's almost as if it was." I don't know.
Like a setup.
Sort of. That was the word I was looking for. A setup to frame last minute the whole thing. But again, for me, and I hope that the judge, Justice Meller, will see it the same. Realizing that the Timecoin white paper is only a fairy tale forgery from 2019 or perhaps later, but he started to create those white papers in 2019. And realizing that, then it is 100% certain that Jenkins is lying.
So the last witness we had on Thursday was a very, very interesting and strange situation. We had Shoaib Yusuf, who was a former student of Craig Wright's and then a former colleague, and he worked for his companies. So he referred to Craig Wright as a friend and a mentor, so obviously very closely tied to him. Now, I got the distinct impression that this guy was expecting to be asked about Craig's connection to Bitcoin, his Bitcoin ideas, the discussions they had over Bitcoin. What he wasn't expecting was about 45 minutes on his directorship of Strassen and Coin, his involvement in supercomputers, and how Craig Wright had diddled him out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was quite extraordinary, wasn't it?
It was amazing. I found that one of the most interesting things indeed. Yeah, except also for that Archbold guy from Lasseter that the token system was debunked. But yeah, the other one was this person, Yusuf. He, you could see him starting to shrink in his chair, getting pale.
He couldn't wait to leave, could he? I've got an appointment. I've got to go.
Yeah, he was so looking forward to leave the room as quickly as possible, because he found the questions really, really awkward. And yeah, mind you, if he was, I mean, two situations. Either he is into the con back then, conning the ATO for hundreds of thousands, and GST and whatever tax was involved in that hundreds of thousands of fraudulent bookkeeping. Or this was the first time that he became aware that his big friend and big mentor that he thinks that Craig Wright is not so much of an big friend and mentor after all, because he has been abusing, dozens of names and persons in that time, and well, he's still doing that currently. But for back then, we at least have the ATO reports where we can look up what has been happening back then. Rees and Mark Ferrier, etc., etc. But this is another person that we are now aware has been the victim of bookkeeping fraud that Craig Wright. What happened here? He claimed, and it was indeed supercomputer related, this Yusuf person never did anything on any supercomputer, but on paper, Craig Wright claimed to the ATO that he was, well, I think a contractor, type of person, and was supposed to have sent, or maybe he even forged. That was not clear from the emails that were shown, but at least they showed a few emails back and forth. I think, yeah, at least to the ATO, but also between Craig and this Yusuf person. I think even in a Skype conversation. But the most important part was what Craig Wright told the ATO, that Yusuf had been doing contracting works, services to supercomputers in 2012 and 2013, which was the tax year 2012-2013. And they made a big point of when this guy was starting to work in Malaysia. And they found out on his LinkedIn page, and they asked, of course, to Yusuf, is it true what you're telling here on the LinkedIn page, that starting January 2013, you already worked in Malaysia? Yeah, that's true. But here, in front, in his communication with ATO, he's saying that you were supposed to send him an invoice of 250,000 Australian dollar for work that you did on supercomputers. And he kept on admitting that there was no supercomputer. I never did any services for supercomputers. I never got 250,000. I never sent any invoice to Craig Wright for... and he wasn't even working for him in that time frame, at least not since January 2013. Well, Craig Wright was claiming that... Yusuf was working for him, but it was technically and practically impossible. And yeah, you could see the poor guy squirming, and yeah, if he could, he wanted to dive under the table and switch off the camera, probably.
Yeah. It was painful to watch by the end. I think of your two scenarios, I don't think he had the demeanour of somebody who was in on the con. I think he was another one of Craig's patsies who was just used, his name was used, his connection was used, and he had no idea that these supercomputers were being claimed for, no idea that half the stuff that was, the invoices that were sent, because he said he didn't send an invoice, yet there was an invoice in the system. So I think he found out for the first time on Thursday exactly what he'd been used for. And I'm sure Craig Wright will find a very good excuse and he'll brush him off, but it was very interesting to see. Yeah. What what I loved, two things on this one. The first one is that I loved the way that the prosecutor, he was just, I tweeted it, that was 5D chess. He was leading him down the path to either implicate himself or Craig Wright. And you're not going to, on the stand, implicate yourself, because he'd say things like, so if you didn't write this, who could have written this? And there's only one answer, and he has to say Craig Wright could have written that. And it just, every time, it hammered another nail into Craig Wright's position as like a company director and this sort of thing. Yeah. So that was great just to see him in action, just again and again and again, forcing him into this cul-de-sacs where his only answer was Craig Wright did it, Craig Wright did it.
Yeah.
And the only downside as far as that's concerned is it made no bearing on his claims to be Satoshi, and we don't know, again, what's in his witness statement. I'm sure he's made mention of Bitcoin things in the witness statement, but what it did do is it added another layer of the fraud element, because it just proved Craig is a dishonest person who will use his friends for his own means.
Yep.
And that, I think, is going to help the judge in making up his mind, well, is Craig Wright the kind of person who could have lied and done this? This evidence that they discussed on Thursday proves beyond a doubt that Craig Wright would do this, because the witness agreed himself that he was swindled.
Mm. Yeah. And the only jump that the judge needs to make, that the Craig Wright fan club and the BSV fan club with it is not making, when he is lying and forging and making a mess of everything, then also for his claim to be Satoshi Nakamoto. And the Craig Wright apologists, they say, yeah, okay, maybe he is a bit of a fraud, but it means he is still Satoshi. No, that is just one of his many lies. And I firmly expect that the judge is going through that thought process that indeed, if he is lying and forging about everything, then he is also doing that for his Satoshi claim.
So we've got more witnesses to come next week, and we'll do another episode next week to cover what we see with those guys. But the most important thing from this week is that apart from this one-off session for Craig Wright, that sums up his evidence. And I mean, overall, given what we've seen from the Kleiman case, what we've seen from the Hodlonaut case, how do you think this testimony compared to prior testimonies? Do you think this was less damaging, more damaging? Where would you put what's happened in the last week with Craig Wright in the ranking of of self-damage when it comes to his testimonies?
No, I found it, let's say, the same level when it comes to his performance up till Mr. Gunning came around. And for me, the highlight so far is Mr. Gunning diving into the coding aspect of Bitcoin. That is something that we have never seen before. And what we expected, what was to be expected from that session, is that Craig Wright would again fail to impress with his Bitcoin and coding knowledge. Yeah, and that came out exactly as we expected. But the previous 6-7 days, Hoff did a very, very, very good job. He was very it almost looked a bit like against the odds, because the BSV fan club, of course, thought that Craig Wright was winning, because Craig Wright kept on answering, kept on being arrogant, kept on correcting Mr. Hoff. But Mr. Hoff, he chewed on his pen. He put down his glasses and he put them back on, and he just continued drilling into all the forgeries and making Craig aware that they, point one, they exist. Point two, what is your excuse? And over the 6-7 days that they discussed these forgeries, man, we have seen so many lame excuses. It's amazing. So if you but that is something that the BSV fan club is not taking into account in some, I don't know why, for some reason. It is so impossible that you have all these lame excuses, and some are even provable lies. Many of them actually, but we will hear the forensic experts about them.
Mm-hmm.
That is not new. We've seen it in the Hodlnot case. We've seen it in the Kleiman case. He is a bullshitter and he tells bullshit stories. And again, for me, the highlight was the coding session.
I have to say that's one thing we haven't touched on very much. We'll end on that. I don't think I tweeted it. I think I mentioned it to some people in a group. But bringing on Mr. Gunning after 6.5 days of testimony was like bringing on Ronaldo or Messi for the last 5 minutes. He just finished Craig Wright off, because before Craig Wright, as you said, was answering questions quite confidently, snapping back and giving his opinions across and trying to factually correct the person questioning him. And Mr. Gunning just wore him down. Craig looked exhausted. He looked like a beaten man by the end, because that was, as you said, that was the moment when, with that coding question, he threw his hands in the air and it was just silence, and he just gave up. Yeah. And it was just the perfect end. It was just beautiful to see. Craig was finished by the end.
Instead of Satoshi teaching the lawyer, it was the lawyer teaching the fake Satoshi how the Bitcoin code is working, and on several levels. I mean, we just talked about the unsigned integer, but it was also about block headers, but this lawyer was well prepared, and more than well prepared. He also had the skills to take a personality, and that is hard. That is really hard, because an arrogant, dominant, rather self-convinced, narcissistic personality like Craig Wright is, you don't easily blow him away. Not very easily. And this lawyer managed to silence him. Craig started to talk in a humble voice. He started to admit that it was a completely different Craig Wright that we saw there. And even several times admitting that he did not really understand it, and that the other guy, the Mr. Gunning, understood it much better.
What was quite funny is because Mr. Hoff was like, "Well, I put it to you that you're wrong about that," and they leave it there. And Mr. Gunning would go, "Nope, you're wrong. Moving on." It's just so blunt. It was brilliant. Okay, so we're coming up to 2 hours now, which is a lot longer than I thought we'd go through. So let's call it a day. Let's call it a week. I should have a list of witnesses coming next week, but I don't have one with me at the moment. Arthur, do you know who we've got coming up?
We have Stephen Matthews. I'm somewhat looking forward to Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning. And after that, there will be a few. I think Peter Wülle, the Bitcoin specialist, will... I think he will be cross-examined. Maybe that is something to look forward. But for me, the main dish of this whole the whole lawsuit is just like in the Hodlnot case is when the forensic experts come explaining the forgeries again. Yeah, man. I'm so looking forward to that.
That's going to be sweet. Well, let's hope that we have it as entertaining week next week as we did this week. And all being well, Arthur, I shall speak to you in a few days' time.
Yes, sir. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice to get these episodes the moment they drop. And if you enjoyed what you heard, we'd really appreciate a star rating and even a review to help us get this out to as many people as possible. Our monthly bonus episodes are available to download from our website for a small consideration. And if you'd like to access all these bonus episodes, plus these monthly updates a few days early and other goodies, you can do so by becoming a Dr. Bitcoin supporter. See the details in the show notes for information on how to do this, or head to our website, drbitcoinpod.com. That's drbitcoinpod.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at drbitcoinpod, and you can email us at drbitcoinpod@gmail.com. That's drbitcoinpod@gmail.com. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon.
You've been listening to Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. Written by Mark Hunter, with additional material by Arthur Van Pelt. editing and production by Mark Hunter. This has been a Contented Media production.